Hello to everybody this afternoon. Welcome to our second keynote here for the day, for the symposium. We've had some very enlightening conversations thus far, some excellent presentations allowing us to reflect and think a little bit about the lessons learned and what we might be doing going forward as we've learned from this very rich experience. And I'd like to thank once again the students from U-Ottawa School of Music for their recordings. Please check out the video recordings of those in the platform, the virtual platform where you can stream those as you move ahead. So as we've done for this morning's keynote, we're going to have our wonderful guest speak for 20 minutes or so about their experiences, their vision moving ahead. And our wonderful guest today is internationally renowned Stephen Murgatroyd. And I'll share a little bit more about him in just a second. I wanted to mention, though, that this is a session where you'll be able to participate. You'll be able to think about some questions, some thoughts, and you can add them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. You can also pose them directly to Dr. Murgatroyd. Following his presentation, we'll have a little bit of an informal discussion there that I'll help moderate. This presentation will be predominantly in English. However, we do have simultaneous interpretation by clicking on the globe, which likely appears at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom software. It's a little sort of globe section. You can click on French or English. Those are the two languages we're offering this afternoon. So hopefully that will work for you. Without further ado, I'll share a few remarks here about our guest presenter. Dr. Murgatroyd has worked extensively in open and distance learning since 1972, so just a few years. At the Open University, UK, Athabasca University in Canada, in corporate training and consulting for Axia Net Media, as a consultant to the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand, Commonwealth of Learning, the Hamdan bin Mohammed Smart University of Dubai, Middlesex University, the UK, and many others. He's advised governments on educational policy in Chile, Paraguay, United Arab Emirates, Australia, New Zealand, and most recently, he has been advising the New Zealand Open Polytechnic on its transformation agenda. In the UAE, he is working with both the Ministry of Possibilities and the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research on the future of technology-enabled learning, especially focusing on smart skills and the role of AI, artificial intelligence, and augmented and virtual reality in reimagining learning. So without further ado, I turn the floor over to you, Dr. Murgatroyd.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some of my experience. I mean, the major reason I've been asked to do this is because I'm old. I'm so old, my blood type has been discontinued. So, and I've been around this space of flexible open distance learning, online learning since I began my teaching career back in the 1970s. So you've just heard a little bit about me. Currently, I'm also working in Ontario quite extensively for Contact North, where I act as their Chief Innovation Officer. I just want to begin by planting a seed that if technology is the answer, then we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, how do we really engage people in learning that matters and makes a difference to them? And I came across this quote the other day, which I think speaks to the way I'm thinking about some of the opportunities. I don't have long, I just have 20 minutes to set a stage for a conversation. So here's what I want to do. I just want to share some top 10 insights from the last 30 years of my work. In terms of here's some things I observe. I'm going to make some observations of what I've seen as a result of the pandemic, and then I'm going to make some suggestions for the future. So it's quite sharp, it's quite quick. These slides will all be available to you later. So when I began at the Open University, we were hugely funded, had massive amounts of money, and I worked on a stats course in 1983, 94, where we had $9 million to develop this course, which had broadcast components, television and radio. It had terrific materials. We had simulations, all sorts of stuff. And we had, in the first year that we offered the course, 36,000 students in total. And the course was expected to have a shelf life of 5 years. I've just finished teaching a course that I wrote in a few weeks, in 3 weeks, for less than $3,000. And I was paid $7,000 to teach 30 students. And those students are partially rewriting the course as they complete it. So the course is kind of automatically revised every 6 months or so. So a massive transition has taken place in spending, in technology, design thinking, and the way we approach this work. So here are my 10 big observations. The most important one is that we don't just teach, we provide meaning and purpose. And I think one of the things that we need to reinforce in all our teaching is why we're teaching this, what its value and purpose is, and how it's valuable to the people studying that thing, whatever that is. We don't do enough of that, and I think we need to design more meaning and purpose activities into our learning activities. The second thing that I think is the most important insight of my kind of career is this idea of presence. The real thing is to build a terrific educational experience based on genuine, authentic teaching presence, real presence of participants, the students engaging with each other, with me, with guests that we may bring in, and students really engaging with content, really creating some kind of cognitive presence. And that building and designing presence is the core task of creating the course. And many people use a textbook. I haven't used a textbook for 25 years, unless I've written it, and in which case I give it away, saying this may be helpful. But we design learning so that students are constantly engaged in a knowledge safari. And one of the things that teaching online is not about is content, it's about experience and the creation of meaning and purpose and understanding. So presence is absolutely critical. And the other thing we know, and the evidence is very strong, that the best predictor of learning outcomes and student completion is the extent to which students are actively engaged in their learning. So what are we doing to co-create knowledge, to get some project work going? In the course I've just finished, students do a collaborative project in the first 3 weeks. They have to go out and interview somebody. They have to use that interview as a way of capstoning their learning in this course. They have to build a knowledge center. 30 students found 1,422 articles, pieces of video, or resources that spoke to the content of the course we were co-creating together. And so I think this notion of presence plus engagement is the big learning from the last 30 years. Now, I mentioned that I don't think content is that important. I mean, it clearly has to be there, but I don't think we need to provide all the content. I think we need to teach how to discover valuable content and how to critique content and how to distinguish between good, poor, bad, awful content. And so a lot of the designs I've used, whether it's in K-12, in at college or university level, involves collaborative knowledge development and finding. Another piece of learning, I teach mainly in organizational behavior, organizational change and transformation, and strategic foresight, is that we don't treat students as passive. We challenge them to do things all the time. In the course I've just finished teaching, and in the course I'm designing for the University of Toronto, each week has a specific challenge where I don't know the answer, but we're going to find it together. And so this challenge-based learning is a key part of design. Now, one of the things that I discovered in working with faculty at a particular university in Ontario in the pivot to online this time last year was how little understanding people have of authentic assessment. I haven't used a midterm, end of term exam for 25 years, wouldn't dream of it, can't imagine its value. I think assessment is a continuous process, one of collaboration and engagement with the learner, but also informing the learner where they are on their learning journey all the time. And so I think this big renaissance in assessment will come out of the pandemic, but I need us to think about assessment as a part of design, not as something you think of at the end of the course or the end of the design process. Now that students are essentially really engaged in their learning, if we've done it well, now that they're actually finding content, we have to create some content for them. And I've been making lots of use of little short videos, 4 or 5 minute videos with key ideas from this week's learning that we're trying to get the students to explore. And each Friday, I also summarize what the students have been doing in their online interaction. Our courses are all asynchronous to really try and capture what some of the insights that the students have discovered in their exploration during the week. We've done lots of short little interviews. The course at the University of Toronto I'm running in the summer with a colleague has interviews from 25 leading authorities in the world that we've recorded over the last few months, and we've edited them down to just 4 or 5 minutes. Now, students aren't bothered about the quality of these experiences, the multimedia experiences, unless they're really dreadful. What they're looking for is ideas, material they can harness and use. There's other resources too that creates a multimedia experience. It's what I think now is making some things possible. Now, design matters. And one of the things I learned in working at both at the Open University and at Athabasca University, sorry about this slide, is that it's not the job of a faculty member to create a course. It's the job of a team of people to create a course. And so I work with an instructional designer, somebody from the library that can help us source materials. I use a technology advisor, and I often involve a former student or a current student as the design team for the course. So in the course we're currently designing to teach this summer, we have 3 students who completed the course last year helping us reimagine how to do that work better this time. We also make a lot of use of open education resources, free to use resources that the students don't have to pay for and that we don't have to create. I'd rather use stuff that's sitting there than have to create a lot of new material. This book that's featured on the screen here is a gift to anybody engaged in design work. It's got over 125 design processes, many of which can be used in course design. So that's my kind of 30 years of experience. This is what I picked up from the pivot work we've all been doing due to the pandemic. One of the things that shocked me is how little professional development had taken place in several institutions I'd worked with, focused on design, pedagogy, and assessment. So I think we all need to think about the investment that we make in this work of understanding teaching and learning in higher education, and in particular, understanding opportunities for reimagining learning designs, which is one of the reasons I was so happy to be invited to do this. Another thing that we spent a lot of time on at Contact North, we offered a couple of MOOCs. We have some materials in studyonline.ca, and we are doing a lot of work with specific institutions, teaching students how to be effective online learners. It's not this notion that Don Tapscott came out with that, oh, we're all digital natives, we all know how to use this technology. Just ask anybody who runs a help desk if that's true. It's not. And students, by and large, are unfamiliar with their responsibilities and opportunities for effective learning. I think we also need to stop seeing faculty as solely responsible for courses and start using course teams. This is what we did effectively at the university. We coached and counseled to get them online really quickly. We had instructional designers. We had people doing the Moodle work for the faculty. We had librarians available from around the world that could help them source resources. We connected instructors that were teaching things like drawing to instructors who've been doing this for years in an online environment, so that we could fast track some ways of working here. Now, blended learning has been the norm since around about 2005, according to my colleague Tony Bates. But I think what we're going to see in the future is a lot more blended learning, a lot more hybrid learning. And so from a design point of view, I think we're learning more about how to leverage the technologies available at somewhere like the University of Ottawa and the skills of the whole community, not just your own crew, how you can leverage the whole community to help you build fantastic course experiences. And the other thing that I give emphasis to all the time is to rethink how we assess learning. And in particular, I'm making a lot more use in the last 5 years than I did in the previous 25 of peer assessment, of students assessing each other's work and students assessing each other's contributions to the work of the class. So the last part of this quick walk through the world is a look at the future. And there's a lot of writing right now, and there's a lot of videos right now about, oh, this will transform higher education. Goldman Sachs have been encouraging investors to invest in AI-based technologies that will replace faculty. All sorts of really weird stuff going on. Here's, as a futurist, here's my observations. I think we're going to see a very dramatic demand-led growth for learning, but not the learning that universities and colleges traditionally provide. So I think we're shifting from a supply-led system to a demand-led system. And this is certainly what we're seeing in other parts of the world like Australia, the UK, and Europe. And an example of that is just last year alone, 650,000 Canadians studied and completed MOOCs from just 4 providers. And most of those were awarded a micro-credential of some sort, many of which are modular and stackable into programs elsewhere in the world. So for example, Queen's has a deal with MIT that if you take certain MOOCs from them, that's part of their master's degree. And that's also what we're seeing happening globally, more modular stackable credentials. I checked all of the religious text. I couldn't see where it said it had to be 3 credits or 6 credits. So what we're now seeing is quarter credit, half credit, 1 credit courses that you can stack into 3 credits and transfer into an undergraduate or graduate degree. We're also seeing the growth of assessment-only qualifications, no courses, just assessment. So the University of Wisconsin, for example, is offering degrees, diplomas, and certificates in nursing, in the professional areas where you're doing competency-based assessments and guided to know what knowledge you need to acquire. The university doesn't care where you get it from. They just need to pass with distinction the assessment activities they've designed. There's some interesting conversations going on. For example, at the University of Calgary, there's a meeting this afternoon, in fact, on how can we create a build your own degree process where students mix and match courses for a key degree that matters to them. And the president's thinking here is we can't predict what skill sets and knowledge people are going to need for the jobs of the future, but students will be able to build their own qualification. And there are some models of that. The Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies at Athabasca University provides a working model for how that can be done. And I think, you know, you look at the growth of micro-credentials around the world, and we're just about to release at Contact North a new document on what needs to happen to make sense of this growing Wild West experience we have. But I think these micro-credentials could be part of the pattern of the future. So these are the 5 likely developments. Here are 3 things that definitely won't happen. you're not going to see the University of Ottawa or indeed any other university in Canada be transformed by technology. It's more likely to be about money and the policy decisions that governments make. I live and work in Alberta. Our government has cut the University of Alberta's budget by around about $46 million this fiscal year. Another thing that won't happen is that you and I as profs will not be replaced by technology, but we're all going to have to learn to dance with robots, because I think technology will supplement and complement the work that we do. For example, a number of courses that I've been involved with, particularly in the teaching of technology, use chatbots as a way of supporting students 24/7. And I think the other thing that won't happen, despite their ambitions, is that the big tech players will get into the education game, will award certificates and micro-credentials, but will not seek to replace the work that universities and colleges do. So I think what will happen, and we're already seeing this with, for example, Amazon's web services, learning activities are now partnering with colleges and universities around the world in a similar way to Siemens in mechatronics. They're partnering up with universities and colleges because they don't know really how to engage learners, but they do know what knowledge and skills they're looking for. So I think these are the things that won't happen. And I think one of the things you should do is to recognize just how much and how fast universities adapted and showed agility in 2020, 21, and continue to do so, which is why they've survived for so long. So there is this conversation going on about the end of the university and the emergence of mega universities in the world, and there are some of those around. The largest university in the world is in India, the Indira Gandhi University with 3.9 million students. But I don't think that's the prototype for how universities in Canada will emerge. There will be closures, there will be mergers and acquisitions, there will be all sorts of things happening. Essentially, universities will exist 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, and will change, but do so gradually. There will not be an overnight transformation. So I'll stop and encourage comments and reactions and questions. I'll end the slide share.
Thank you so very much, Stephen. Insightful to see some observations, particularly with your history, your decades worth of history there, and some of your observations, your futurist vision, sort of where things may go. One question that comes to mind is have you personally changed any practices that you've been doing either in your teaching or consulting specifically as a result of what we've lived in this last year's pandemic, even though many of these practices may have already been taking place for you? But have you reflected on things any differently just because of this last year?
Yeah, I've made a lot more use of peer networks than I've done before, and peer-based learning activities, because given how what I'm teaching and where I'm doing it, my students are all over the world. So most of this activity is asynchronous, but I had a group of students in New Delhi, a group of students in Massachusetts, a group of students in Europe. And so I created activities for each of those groups that were challenges for them, but they could find synchronous ways of connecting to each other that I don't need to be involved in. The other thing I've learned is that I'm not the most important person in the room. The students are, and the more we can empower and engage them in owning their learning, the more learning they will do. And so I've stopped trying to control my classrooms and started to challenge them to solve problems where I don't really know the answer, but I know how to learn my way to a better tomorrow, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat, some sent to the overall group and some sent to me directly here, pertain to specific instructional context. So for instance, one of them is about, you're speaking about experience over content. You're speaking about authentic assessment. How do you do that online, in particular when you're teaching near 1,000 class students, or when there are 500 students logging in to your 3-hour session? You know, what are your thoughts there?
Stop teaching in 3-hour sessions, and stop seeing it as 500 students or 1,000 students. See it as lots of groups of students who you can cluster around a text. I think what that question suggests is this focus on synchronous work as opposed to asynchronous work. Now, one of the great things about starting my career at the Open University in the UK is the first course I was involved with had 95,000 students for 32 weeks. And I never saw any of them because it was all done at a distance. And what I learned was that you can create powerful learning activities that make a reliance of the individual on their connection to a specific tutor and on their peer network. I learned this very early in my career, back in the 1970s. And that design influence of powerful learning designs that engage students with content, engage students in peer networks, engage them in specific ways with faculty, changed the way I thought about what instruction was. And so I'm fortunate in that I didn't begin. I did teach. I taught you to teach intro psych to 750 students at a time, which was more like edutainment than actual instruction. You had to create really powerful ways of keeping 750 people in one classroom engaged. And I learned a lot in doing that. But the powerful learning is to stop seeing yourself as sage on the stage and see yourself as a designer of learning experiences, and see a large group as a collection of small groups that can interact with each other. And see the task is designing activities for small groups that teach what it is you need to teach, but get them talking to each other. And then you facilitate a conversation rather than teach and give instruction.
So I'm hearing that it's almost like an institutional community responsibility where a program has to think carefully about the length of a particular session, the number of persons, learners in it, as much as the instructor is thinking about the approaches they're using and how they're creating community and discourse within that environment.
Right, and the slide I showed on the notion of presence is the key to that thinking of how do we create this community of inquiry, this really powerful community of learners who are also able to contribute to the knowledge base of that course. And I do this at high school level. I do this in junior high. I do this in colleges. I do this in universities. So this is not just graduate level work. We designed, for example, for a high school, a program on climate adaptivity.
You put your hand up to ask a question on Zoom.
Where everybody had to look at their own community and bring evidence into the class that we then shared and looked at common patterns. And that's how we leveraged the resources of that classroom to teach each other and for me to learn from them, and then show them how to use that kind of knowledge to structure an inquiry.
Makes perfect sense. I'm going to just bounce back to one of the questions posed in the chat that was related to one of these contexts. Rashmi asks, how do you engage students in a service course when they feel they're wasting their time taking it, even if you have taken pains to show its relevance to their personal lives and professional careers, in particular in a distance online capacity?
Yeah. I know your pain. I taught intro stats that was compulsory to everybody, and it's not a class anybody really looks forward to, including me. But I'm all right now. I'm fully recovered. I have these tablets I take. It's terrific. We're not in the entertainment business, and we're not in the business of necessarily, changing the world through a service class. But I think that it's a design challenge. I mean, I think what I would say is I would sit with some former students, I would sit with some of your peers and reimagine what that learning experience would look like if it was done in a different way, using projects, using team-based challenges, using activities that support the subject that you need. When I began teaching intro stats, I was doing so having the university just fired the chairman of the Royal Statistical Society because he only passed one student out of 50 a year. And so they fired him and hired me and say, your job is to teach really well and to teach to this standard, but to get the students through this. And so I just reimagined this as a set of challenges, a set of activities. So, it's a design challenge. I think we have to reimagine what instruction looks like completely.
Makes sense. I wonder what happened to those other 49 students. Heavens, if there was only one.
I'll tell you, they went to somebody else's class and passed.
Fair enough. I hope. Just a note here. I'm seeing in the chat the instructions related to how to pose the questions. Very, very pertinent. If you'd like to ask, you can certainly go in the reactions usually at the bottom pane of your Zoom window. And when you click on reactions, certainly you can use applause or any other reaction you like, but you can raise your hand there if you'd like to pose a question that you'd like to share. I see a thumbs up, so I'm not sure if that is a willingness to ask a question. If it is, the floor is yours, Michael Reynolds. Yes,
Stephen, fantastic comments and insights. Professor, I'm just, by the way, I'm a retired part-time professor, but professors that are significantly younger than me looking for tenure get it essentially based on research, somewhat limited based on doing all the good things you were talking about. Have you seen any universities change their essentially formula for tenure?
Yes. So the University of Alberta has two routes. One is the traditional, community contribution research teaching, where research is the only thing that really matters. That's one kind of route. But the other one is to say, look, I'm not interested in research, but I'll do the teaching thing. I'll be exceptional. And there are equally clear routes to tenure through those two different pathways. And another number of other universities around the world, especially in Australia, have also done that to create a teaching route and a teaching plus research route. What's interesting is senior researchers at a place like MIT or Georgia Tech are required to teach most of their time. The most senior researcher, the kind of Nobel Prize winning guys, have to teach first-year undergraduates. And they do that deliberately to ensure that there is a connection back to where the community really is in understanding stuff like physics or chemistry or whatever the subject may be, literature. And so I think that one of the things that will happen as a result of the pandemic is more universities and colleges will pay attention to teaching as a challenge that has to be understood in more depth. And it may change the weighting of some approaches to tenure. But, we're all trying to get our age score high. My age, I'm 70 and retired, and my age score is still going up. So don't ask me how, I have no idea. Nor frankly, do I care. But I think there are emerging teaching routes through to tenure in universities.
Thank you.
At the same time, we should also acknowledge just how few tenure track positions there are anymore as universities become more and more part of the gig economy. And so 60% of all teaching in North America is done by gig workers, not by tenured faculty.
Thank you, Stephen. Just bouncing back to the chat, I don't want to run through and forget someone's question. Someone was asking a little bit about your weekly challenges that you were mentioning before. And the question is, can you highlight, please, how you design these weekly challenges? For instance, what are the tools used that fostered collaboration? Was it, for instance, Google Documents, or were there other tools that you would recommend here to bring people together?
So a couple of examples in the course I've just finished, which is on innovation and productivity. I asked them to find examples of companies that had a terrific innovation that brought the company to its knees. And I'm not providing the case studies. They have to write a 500-word case study of that this week. And so 30 students produce 30 different case studies, which then become part of the course. In the course we're designing for the University of Toronto on the foresight stuff, we're asking them to analyze the rhetoric and language of the government of Ontario around introducing online learning as a privatized activity at TVO, TFO, and using a tool which is called causal layer analysis to get past the bullshit and say, what does this thing actually, what is this conversation all about? So it's not about one thing, it's actually about something else. Can we do that analysis? So we're teaching tools, we're creating content, we're co-creating content, and we're challenging students to do really search critically and reflectively the literature or the materials they can find online. So we're also teaching that critical inquiry. When I taught a course with my friend Timothy Caulfield at the University of Alberta, who's one of the leading scholars in evidence in medical science, we used a catalog of 12 common errors in medical journals to get students to find examples of each of the 12 in a specific field of medicine. So you take something like, I don't know, cancer, colon cancer, find examples of these 12 common errors in the journal literature in the last 10 years. And so all of a sudden we have this catalog of terrific resources that we then use in a graduate program. So how would we counter this kind of nonsense in referee journal publishing that opens up this space of some of the mistakes of science? So lots of ways in which you can design these challenges. As for tools, whatever works. So Google Docs works well. All sorts of web tools are available for this. There's all sorts of sharing platforms for this kind of work. There are some in the futures world. There's a site where you can build maps of the future using various kind of specific procedures, scenarios, futures wheel, causal layer analysis, and so on. So we send people to these tools. We also ask students to build storyboards and present a storyboard. So very like a Petracucha. So a Petracucha is 20 slides in less than 10 seconds per slide. And you can't have any words on the slide. You have to create images and then speak from your knowledge and your heart about the topic that you're presenting. And so we also look for not just the hard skills that we're teaching, but the soft skills that we as employers are looking for from students. Can you communicate? Can you present in public? Can you analyze a problem? Can you be critical about something? Can you use language in intelligent ways? Can you work in a team? These are all things that we're assessing all the time.
Got trapped by my own unmute button there. Yeah, those are specific examples. It would be quite helpful for those challenges. Pivoting to a different question here in the chat. Hope McLean was thanking you for acknowledging the predicament of part-time gig teachers. She shares that you're the first person that heard to talk about that specifically today. What would you advise regarding how we teach within 200 hours that the university claims we teach? So I don't know if this question is specific to credit hours or the frame of time that we're supposed to stay within.
So isn't this a total nonsense? the whole notion, the Carnegie unit, which is time-based management of learning activities, was developed in 1916 and is no longer fit for purpose. So I think one of the things that's going on out there is that the people seeking learning are saying, look, I just need this knowledge right now. I don't need all this other stuff. So I'd like this partial credit. And it's not about time, it's about knowledge, capability, and competence. So that's how we design this. I've given up on counting time. And when I ran a very large consulting company in Europe, 150 management consultants, we stopped billing by time. We bill by value. And I think that's how we should design our learning. This course has these objectives, and this is how I'm going to teach them. And I'm not going to count the number of hours. And that's how I teach at Athabasca. They say, for this number of students, we'll pay you this amount of money, providing you achieve these milestones. Right? There's no mention of time, other than you've got to do this in an 8-week window. That's it. So I would stop hours and say it's a nonsense, and focus on learning outcomes, learning processes, and the length of the course in terms of total time, as opposed to hours.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I think a number of faculty members would, you know, see that as very wise advice. We've struggled a lot this year with overload, not only as instructors, but students being asked to do far more micro assignments and tasks in the context of each of their courses. And sometimes they'll have 5 or 6 courses in a semester. And in some cases, we hear from some students that say, well, if the instructor doesn't really consider the notion of time, then I'll be doing twice as much for this course than I'll be doing for this other course, and I'll just never make it. What are your thoughts there?
So when we were helping a university in Ontario think about how to design online learning, we actually said you have to think about the student's use of time. So the original question was the instructor's time. The student's use of time is a very different issue. And when we design courses, when my team here designs courses, we ask the question, what is it the student needs to do? How do we know they've done it? How much time will it take for them to do that on average? Because some students will take longer, some will do it faster. And so we built a template, a design template, that was focused on the student's use of time. However, that doesn't tell me a thing about the instructor's use of time. And so I would see these as very different questions. That, you know, how much time should I spend on teaching? Maybe none. Maybe all the work is in the design work to get to the point where the students can manage their own learning. But in order to do that, we have to design it from the student's use of time point of view. And it was very interesting to watch faculty reaction to that. They said, well, it's all about my time, not theirs. Bullshit, which is a technical term, meaning not strictly true. But we challenge faculty to imagine the student using the time that they had available in a house with very limited access to broadband, with kids running around and one of the partners being at work for part of the time and you having studying and childcare responsibilities. Now design the course. So we need to design the courses from the learner's point of view back. And what we tend to do is design it from the textbook out. Throw the textbook away, imagine what the learning outcomes are, and reimagine that whole design process from the get-go, which is one of the reasons you need a learning design team that involves students. Faculty are really good at some aspects of learning design, but they're not the best at learning design, as I've discovered in my 30-year journey. You always get new insights from looking at peers, looking at student learning experiences, listening to an instructional designer, working with a librarian, and working with a technology expert. And that's what a good course team should look like. And when we were building our MBA, that's essentially what we had. We had just a couple of faculty to get to 1,000 students online, just a few faculty that were permanent, but the team was a fully functioning course design team that were commissioning resources from around the world. But we were essentially a design team, not creating content team.
That's really interesting, integrating student voice in the design process. I mean, I think many people would also agree with that being a valuable principle to abide by. What strategies or ways have you either used or seen to be helpful for individual instructors to integrate student perspectives in how they design or put together or facilitate their courses?
So a friend of mine teaches fine art at Algoma University, Tom Flanagan. And he and I knocked around for some time as the pivot began to online learning. How the heck am I going to teach drawing online when I've only just bought my first computer? He's 70 as well. And I said, why don't we just pull together some of your past students and ask them? So we ran a focus group of 6 people, which was really good for him because it taught him how to use Zoom, which he'd also never done before. But these 6 former students came up with like 40 design ideas for how he could do this. And he used most of them in his course. One of the things he learned was teach less, learn more. Right, which is a big phrase from the former Minister of Education from Singapore. We overteach and underlearn. And so he stepped back from trying to give too much instruction. He begins every lesson with 5 minutes of chat just to get everybody comfortable about what have you done with a pencil since we last met. And they don't have to show anything, but it comforts everybody and gets them in a mood for teaching. So I think focus groups with past students, getting current students I've got students already lined up for Toronto in the summer. So we've already had 2 meetings with 6 of those to talk about the design.
That's fantastic. I'll invite everybody, maybe there are time remaining for 2 or 3 questions here. If anyone wants to raise their hand or just unmute and go for it. I see Diane. Go for it, Diane.
Did you see my question? I'm just want to make sure you didn't decide not to ask it before I ask it.
I see it. I'm
okay.
So sorry. I see it just wiggled right in there. Go for it.
Good.
You can ask it yourself.
So I'm safe? Okay. So you talked about peer review, and I've integrated peer review into the class that I teach and taught this winter. And what I find interesting is some groups, and the peer review is in the context of a group assignment that they do throughout the semester that builds to a presentation at the end. Some students will be really honest in their peer review, but then you always have at least several groups who will agree to give one another perfect marks. So I was curious what suggestions you might have for that, because obviously, I'm not in that conversation when they're having it.
Right. So we use a specific piece of software, which makes that very difficult. And it's called Critic. I'll just pull it out. I'll just share a screen. This is Critic. It's developed in Ontario, actually. It's a spin-off from Top Hat. And they've developed solutions to those kind of issues and challenges. And so there are algorithms built in here which make it very difficult for conspiring and those kind of things. But it's a way of making sure there's rigor attached to the process. And there's some nice professor success stories here about how various profs have used this piece of kit to make a difference to that. What we've found is that students are actually tougher on each other when they use this software than they are if you just ask them to peer review each other's work. So that's one thing. The other thing we ask our students to do is to evaluate not just simply the work, but the contribution each student made to that work. So in the project for the course I've just finished, for example, there's 3 teams of 10 completing a review of a specific industry and its productivity and innovation over the last decade, and making recommendations for that industry, which are reviewed by industry professionals as well as me. But they have to mark the other 2 teams' work, and they have to assess in their own team the individual contributions that they were made in terms of both quality and value added. So we've created a fair bit of rigor around the process, which I think this software kind of enables to be done efficiently. So I'll stop sharing the screen. But I understand your challenge, which is you're not party to all the secret deals done.
Thank you very much.
There's a question, follow-up to your share there, Stephen, by Laurie. Will the University of Ottawa be adopting any peer review apps? To my knowledge, no. However, that isn't to say that some of them can't be utilized on an individual basis. I will defer to perhaps Nancy or Aline there if there is a different take on that. I'm going to read maybe 1 or 2 more questions before we allow you to kind of wrap up, if you like. One of the remaining questions is, how do you get buy-in from leadership and instructional peers to participate in course design groups?
Well, so I have a genetic disadvantage here. I'm from Yorkshire. And the characteristics of a Yorkshireman is we speak our mind, even if there's nothing in there. So that's one thing. And the other thing is the family motto is forgiveness is easier to get than permission. So it would never occur to me to ask for permission. But that's me. It's a best practice in the design of online learning to do so through teams. It's an established best practice. It's widely written about. It's an evidence-based process. Now, the team may be working on multiple courses. So if you take, for example, the business school world, which is the one I know best as a former dean, you could have a team working on the suite of courses that we know as accounting, or the suite of courses we know as organizational change and behavior, or the suite of courses known as operations management. So this team works on all of those. And that team then has a deep knowledge of that subject matter because the faculty are there. But the instructional designers are saying, oh, but do you realize what we've just done in accounting? So for example, Athabasca University is working with Ametrios Learning in Toronto, which is an AI IBM Watson shop, to develop work-based cooperative simulations. So the students are in a co-op environment, virtual co-op environment, where some of the characters are actually the prof. Some of the characters are other students, but 12 of the characters are AI animations and AI Watson-driven characters. Once we built it for a course in ethics, in business ethics, using the same characters for a simulation that was financially based or a simulation in operations became dead easy. And so the same design team were able to say, we can do, it took us 4 months to design this first one off, we can do yours in 3 weeks. So there is a value in creating a kind of cross-disciplinary group that's working within a faculty to do that work. It's very difficult to go from business to physics for example, where you need a whole different approach and a new understanding. But I think all the evidence is in that, best practices speaks to team development. Now, the business implication of that is the faculty, individual faculty is no longer responsible for their own course. And one of the realities of online learning in traditional online learning universities like Athabasca or the Open University is that the idea is to get to scale. And the University of Ottawa will not get to scale on some of its programs and courses until it changes its contractual arrangements with faculty. And that's not going to happen. So I think I recognize limitations here, but I'm saying, but if you want to do stuff, do it. And there are willing hands everywhere around the world saying, if you want some help, count me in. So just do it.
Yeah, just do it. You're the one that came up with that slogan, and then Nike stole it. I figured.
Yeah, sadly no, but.
No. Perhaps seeing no further questions at the moment, perhaps we'll leave the floor to you for 3 to 4 minutes of concluding remarks here and envisioning from the lessons learned moving ahead here.
Well, maybe I start from where I just finished. So I've mentioned a few things as we went through around the future, and that's what I want to end up with. And I gave a presentation last week, and I'm doing one in Paraguay in a couple of weeks' time around, this is a very precarious moment for education, especially in conservative-run jurisdictions like this one I'm in, which is Alberta, where our rate of COVID infection is twice that of India right now. So different governments will take a different view of the future of colleges and universities. The view that's been taken here is that they're bloated institutions and need cutting. So there is a 7% annual cut for the last 2 years and will be for the next 3 in all our post-secondary institutions. They hired McKinsey to look at the next 20 years of Alberta's future and paid them $3.2 million to suggest what Bob Ray did for about $50 in Ontario a few years ago. Essentially, though, what I see happening is this. Universities and colleges will gradually do a lot more public-private partnerships to create new opportunities to meet the needs of individuals, communities, and employers. On the community side, for example, I'm forging partnerships between a collection of nonprofits here, the federal government, provincial governments across the West in climate change adaptation. And we're funded by NRCan, the federal government's natural resources ministry. But there's lots of opportunities for creative partnerships and alliances. That's one thing. The second thing I think that's going to change is we've been living in a supply-led world for the last 100 years. So you created courses and programs, made them available, and hope people show up. And if you look at all the micro-credentials that are now available in Ontario, all 1,400 of them, only 5 are available on demand. The rest are semester-based. What kind of nonsense is this? They should all be available on demand. And I think that the 650,000 students who did MOOCs understood what on-demand learning looks like. We need to get our head around on demand. So I think public-private partnerships to deliver a greater range of learning resources on demand, modular, stackable learning is going to be shaping the direction of travel for the future. It's not going to happen quickly, but it's going to happen over time. And what we're seeing in Australia and Europe is exactly those things. What we're also going to see when governments begin to realize that they're not only broke, but they can't tax to get themselves out of being broke, is a realignment of funding and structures. So I think we're going to see fewer institutions overall around the world, but more differentiation, more attempts to say, well, we have this kind of areas of expertise, and a growing separation of teaching and research. So the question that was asked earlier, given that how we get tenure is this, but our teaching is this, what's the deal here? I think we're going to see more and more teaching as a separate track, funded differently, managed differently, contracted for differently. And that's certainly how we saw it in designing the MBA all those years ago. We were anticipating the future. So I think the game is changing, but it's not going to be transformative change. It's like the nature of work. I mean, we're gradually seeing in diagnostics, in medical diagnostics, AI get better than doctors. So we're gradually going to see the replacement of some of our current ways of working with new ways of working. But we need to own that future. And we do so by being the leaders of the innovation that will make our future possible. So own your own future is, I think, the big message.
What a way to leave us for this last plenary session here associated with today's symposium. Own your future. Sounds like it's very opportunity based. This ties together so many of the themes we've heard today. In fact, our last session, session 6, will be tying all these themes together and hearing what you've been taking away from that as participants in the session, as enactors of these visions moving ahead. And on behalf of everyone, we're very grateful to you, Dr. Stephen Murgatroyd, for sharing your afternoon with us and these thoughts. This recording, as well as your slides, will be posted in this virtual platform for people to see thereafter. Thank you very much. We can look for the reactions, applause here. Maybe everybody can find in their reactions the applause or the thumbs up, or hopefully not the crying emoji, unless you're crying emotively, emotionally, because it was so moving. I'm not sure. Thanks again. Best wishes.